I'm glad I had that little chat with you guys before.
Where's the camera? Cool.
Decision. I'm going to look up into that camera right there. Right, I have to go to the other side of it. Oh.
This camera sees them facing that way. If you want to run up there, that's the stair chair.
All right. Sorry.
That's why they use this.
Hi, welcome. My name's Lou Meyer. I'm the president of the nonprofit that's putting this event on, Foothill Arts Resources and Media. I'd like to welcome you all to the event. I hope we'll come away with some action points that we can use to move forward in our community, to raise awareness of gun laws, resources, and safety practices, and to respond to the need for increased preemptive protection and safety practices for our children in school. We appreciate your attending the discussion and are honored to have Judge Thomas Anderson as our moderator and the distinguished panel with us tonight. Now I'd like to hand the proceedings over to Judge Anderson. Thank you very much.
Good evening and welcome to our town hall discussion, Community Dialogue on Guns and Violence. And thank you to the Foothill Arts Resources and Media, NCTV, and KVMR for hosting the event. First, let me explain briefly how the evening is going to proceed. And after I introduce our distinguished panelists, there'll be some opening comments, and then we'll move quickly to questions and answers. I will direct questions to the individual panelists and then allow other panelists to contribute their thoughts. Each panelist will have a maximum of 3 minutes to respond or answer a question. Our audience members have been provided cards on which to write questions for the panel. When you have a question, just hold up the card, and one of our scouts, we have an Eagle Scout and an almost Eagle Scout here to collect them, and they'll bring them up front. Just a reminder, please turn off your cell phones, and the restrooms are in the lobby. So about our topics tonight. We're here to discuss gun violence in our community. The areas that the panel will focus on include school safety, community safety, safety regulations, gun education, and other related topics. We are doing this town hall to promote meaningful discussion about our community values, our practices, and our safety, and to encourage friendly discussion, to seek understanding of the issues we face here in our community, to discover some of the problems and some of the solutions available to us as a community. We are not here to debate the Second Amendment as a political topic that is quite divisive. That would take the entire evening and not address specific issues to our community's needs. Our goal is to discuss the issues around our local needs. We have important topics to discuss and an impressive panel of individuals to discuss them. You'll notice that our panel members are local concerned citizens, each with their own distinct qualifications. You will also note that none of these folks are officials. Of course, many of the issues require collaboration with government agencies. But we think it's important that this is a community, citizen-based discussion because any solution to community problems requires community members to feel responsible. We as citizens, as members of our community, have to be involved and committed to doing what Nevada County residents traditionally do. That is, step up when needed. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll start on the audience's right. Dr. George Rebane, PhD. Dr. Rebane is a semi-retired veteran of the U.S. Army, a life member of the NRA, and a member of the Nevada County Sportsman's Club. He's a certified range safety officer, a scientist, and entrepreneur. He is also a former city and county planning commissioner, columnist, radio commentator, and he hosts a socio-political blog. Next to him is Amanda Wilcox, a Nevada County resident for over 40 years. Mrs. Wilcox has long been involved in education, has served 4 terms on the Board of Trustees of Ready Springs Elementary School District, 10 years as chair. She is a legislation and policy chair for the California chapters of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. She is the founder and president of the Nevada Placer Brady chapter of the Brady Campaign. You may remember in 2001, her family experienced the ultimate tragedy when their young daughter was killed in a mass shooting by a severely mentally ill man. Her husband and her efforts after that event resulted in the passing of Laura's Law in California, allowing assisted outpatient treatment to be court-ordered. She currently serves on the Nevada County Mental Health Board, as well as other boards and committees. And seated in the middle is Jared Johnson. Mr. Johnson has also been a resident of Nevada County for over 40 years. He's a U.S. Army veteran, retired as a captain from the Grass Valley Police Department in 2005. He's also a graduate of the FBI National Academy. Currently, he's an instructor of Administration of Justice at Sierra College and the owner of The Range, an indoor range and training facility for public and law enforcement. In addition, he has been a scoutmaster for over 30 years. Next is Morgan Margulies. Mr. Margulies is a senior at Nevada Union High School. He's president of the Social Justice Club, a 4-year participant on the award-winning policy debate team. He's also the very first year-long student representative for the high school students on the school board. He has been accepted at Columbia University for the fall 2018 term. Next is Carla Holtzclaw. Ms. Holtzclaw developed lockdown procedures and trainings for K through 12th grades. She is a nationwide consultant on school safety and has coordinated disaster stimulations involving students, teachers, parents, public safety, and hospitals. She served as a member of the San Jose Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force. She was a high school English teacher and has served as chair of the Santa Clara County Behavioral Health Board, all that before moving to Nevada County. And next is Michael Gomez. Among his accomplishments, Mr. Gomez is a consultant bureau chief with the California Department of Justice Commission on police officer standards, overseeing peace officer training for Northern California. He began his career as a deputy and sergeant with the San Diego Sheriff's Office. He has served as deputy director of the Division of Investigation and Enforcement Programs at the California Department of Consumer Affairs. He was a council member and vice mayor of the city of Dixon and has served on the Nevada County Grand Jury and has been a local resident for over 10 years. Now I'm going to turn to our panel, and they'll each give a brief introduction, and then after that concludes, we'll begin our question and answer phase. Let's start with Mr. Urbane.
Good evening. We're gathered here tonight on an auspicious anniversary to talk about guns and consider the roles of the Second Amendment, not debate it. Our Revolutionary War started on this date in 1775 after the battles of Lexington and Concord, the day before, when about 1,000 British regulars marched out of nearby Boston to confiscate some guns and powder the colonists had collected in anticipation of what was about to happen. Word of that British advance spread quickly throughout the surrounding communities, and several hundred men responded by grabbing muskets hanging over their hearths, each heading for the coming battle by the quickest means available to them. They came to be called the Minutemen, and I'll return to them in a moment. When invited to sit on this panel, I was told that this was to be a town hall discussion with a Q&A period afterwards, and not a debate. That's a good starting point for us. Let's see where we'll wind up. Our past debates about citizens' guns rights and ownership have helped polarize Americans, perhaps as much as any other issue about governance, government, economics, education, and lately school massacres like the recent one in Parkland. About guns, the discussion has mostly revolved around the needs for personal security and recreational activities like target practice and deer hunting. These uses of guns are considered by many to be discretionary and not necessary to maintain a modern civil society that has well-organized local law enforcement agencies. And even less needed are recreational uses that celebrate a primitive past which, for the greater common good, should best be left behind. What, in my humble opinion, does not get proper and needed attention in these discussions is the Second Amendment and the reasons our founders included it in our constitutions, reasons readily understood by succeeding generations of Americans until about the middle of the last century. Then, led by left-leaning political elements, a narrative arose about how, when, and what kinds of arms should private citizens be able to own and bear. The right, those of the strict constructionist mind, maintain that a free people should always retain arms of sufficient capability to counter tyranny, including from their own government, as counseled by our founders, and as had the Minutemen and all Americans since then. The left disagreed and argued that the founders intended the possession and exercise of deadly force to be solely in the hands of government that might include citizens only when assembled in well-organized militias, and that meant well-organized only by the government. To them, our government going rogue was a non-starter. It can happen here because this is America. Tonight I'm here not to debate, but to present an understanding of the Second Amendment shared by tens of millions of Americans. And that understanding holds that the essence of the Second Amendment is its guarantee of the people's right, along with the means to resist tyranny and restore the country. Revolutions always start with a single spark, of necessity a small spark that then spreads to inform and inspire multitudes of others similarly aggrieved. The founders included the second so as to make sure that such a spark can first thought to be possible, and then that when that spark is struck, it cannot be silenced in its cradle by a tyrant before it became the inspiring and encouraging flame to spread across the land. This was the spirit of 1775, the spirit of the sacrificing Minutemen bequeathed to us through the Second Amendment. 250 years ago, that capability in the hands of citizens was made possible by Americans' families having a musket ball and powder horn hanging above the hearth. As weapons technology advanced, civilians came to own and bear percussion cap rifles and revolvers, then breech loaders with fixed ammunition, then bolt-action rifles with spring-loaded magazines, then semi-automatic handguns and long guns with more substantial magazines. In short, the citizens' armaments, were they to assemble, were maintained at a rough par level with the force that could be quickly brought to bear against them by the authorities. And in such a manner, peace reigned in the land between our governors and us, the governed, and between the law-abiders and the criminal rogues. In my experience, giving the name par force to this rough equilibrium and seminal principle in the heart of the Second Amendment has served well over the years to facilitate discussions and debates. As history shows, par force has never meant militarizing the civilian population. It only refers to the state of affairs in the land in which the citizens always have the means of last resort to make themselves heard, and when hearing of such desperate and just resistance happening elsewhere, to have the ready means to join in, support, and multiply it until the tyrant falls. America's history of having maintained par force over the generations has assured that our government has remained of, by, and for the people. We've just scratched the surface here. Thank you for letting me introduce this.
Ms. Wilcox?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Judge Anderson, for serving as our moderator, and I do want to thank FARM, I won't say what the acronym stands for, but the organizers of this event. I know a lot of work goes into planning these kinds of events. So, I had always been disturbed by gun violence and its innocent victims, and faithfully made donations to the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence for over 20 years. I thought I was doing this for others, to keep them safe. I never thought that I would personally be touched by gun violence. But as you heard, in January 2001, my daughter, bright and beautiful at age 19, was killed in a rampage shooting while home on winter break from college. She was filling in as a receptionist at the Nevada County Behavioral Health Department when a person with severe mental illness opened fire with a semi-automatic handgun and shot Laura 4 times at point-blank range, killing her instantly. When the gunfire ended, 3 people lay dead, 3 were severely injured, and a community was left shaken. And I imagine that many of you here remember that terrible and tragic day. My life was turned upside down, of course, but my husband Nick and I found that Laura's story gave us a voice to effect change on issues that we care deeply about. So we worked first on mental health care reform, and then in 2005 we became the legislative advocates for the California chapters of the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence. I am now in my 14th year of working on firearm policy. I've helped to pass over 55 firearm bills and have been instrumental in the enactment of many significant California gun laws. And I hope at some point we can circle back to California strong gun laws and their effectiveness later tonight. The Brady campaign's overarching goal is to keep weapons out of dangerous hands. Our goal is to reduce firearm injury and death by ensuring that those who, based on their condition or past behavior, are deemed at risk for gun violence. So our main policy goal is background checks, which actually enjoys broad support among Americans. We also have public health and safety programs to mainly promoting safe storage to keep teens and youth safe from gun violence, our ASK program, our Speak Up program in the schools, our school memo program in the schools, and I hope we can circle back to that later tonight. You know, I have spoken quite a bit on this issue and have been in other debates, and I find that once we get past the rhetoric and partisanship, there's often much common ground, more than people realize and expect. So I look forward to that tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Stand up for just a second. I'm Jared Johnson. I'm here tonight to share my law enforcement experience, my education background, and my expertise in firearms and firearms-related law, however I can, to help us come to some kind of understanding and maybe some solutions to some of this school violence and the issues that we face. But before I do that, I'd like to use my 3 minutes to, because we're in a government building and we're all fine citizens, I'd like to ask these scouts to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if they would.
That's good.
May the audience please rise. Please place your hands over your hearts and pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you, gentlemen. Fine-looking young man. This time, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the panel, and I hope that the Pledge of Allegiance helps us remember that we all are one community. Thank you.
Mr. Margulies.
Hi. I'd like to thank Judge Anderson and Farm for having me here. I think it's very important to have the student opinion and youth represented in community discussions like this. I believe that I was here asked to come to represent and provide my opinion on the sort of nationwide youth and student movement to demanding legislative reform post Stoneman Douglas. I am the president of the Social Justice Club, which helped facilitate the school-wide walkout that took place March 14th, that had around 200 people in attendance. As an advocate for stricter gun laws, I believe that reform, while local-based solutions are necessary, that reform must come from the top down. That federal and state legislative decisions are what shape the culture of gun violence across our community. So I'm here to provide the student opinion and represent the sort of national movement that's been growing throughout the last couple of months. And I'm just very grateful that I was asked to be here and represent the youth. Thank you.
Ms. Holtzclaw.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and especially for the farm for inviting me as a newcomer up here. My background is in school safety, and it was in safety in the classroom with at-risk kids for a number of years as an English teacher, then bridging 40 providers from mental health, social health, physical health, and law enforcement into a school of 4,200 kids in 40-some languages. We became a state model. After Columbine, superintendent assigned me to go work with the SWAT teams and administration at San Jose PD, which was an interesting experience for an English teacher, armed with a red pen. And I learned a lot. School safety is complicated. There is no answer. There is no one answer. We all have different perspectives. We all have different lenses. I was brought in by law enforcement to debrief parents and students and teachers after armed intruder events, and I saw a whole different side. You know, when you don't go through it, you really don't know. And I also have been either fortunate or unfortunate to speak with survivors from Columbine, Santee, and other school shootings. So again, I'm glad to see the community engaged. I think it will be a healthy conversation, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Gomez.
Thank you. And my name is Michael Gomez. I was former bureau chief with the California Department of Justice Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. And I was asked to come this evening to really talk about community-based policing and the components and principles of community-based policing and how it relates to our discussion tonight. And how it relates tonight is that it's about starting the conversation about the issues that are facing this community. And like law enforcement, what we often do is we bring in subject matter experts to discuss, but more importantly, it's solution-based, it's problem-based. It's really talking about not so much the differences that the community has or that the police have, but the difference, but really the commonalities we have. And the very commonality is always public safety. You know, our community has a culture and has a value. So with respect to that discussion, as we start this conversation tonight, it's important that we're all neighbors. We're all neighbors here. We're all citizens of the United States. This kind of reminds me a little bit of my former life as a city council member, where you had really tough decisions to make. But the one thing that I always did in community policing with the commission or with the law enforcement community is to listen. Listen to the value of the individuals that you're having a discussion with. Respect their orientation, respect their opinion, because when it comes down to the end of the day, you're going to have an understanding of your neighbor. And the more understanding we have of each other, the more we're going to be able to problem solve and bring solutions to the community and what our priorities are for protecting one another. Because ultimately, law enforcement can't do it alone. It's you, the individual, that really makes the difference in this nation, that makes the difference in this community when we start understanding the priorities and the commonality we each have as residents of this county. So the whole deal of community-based policing really is starting that conversation, listening, understanding the values that we all share in common, and not so much the differences. And of course, this is an emotionally charged discussion. I know that it can be, but put aside the emotion and listen to your neighbor. Listen to what they have that you can have commonality with in terms of how do we join hands together to come to a solution that better protects one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank each of you for your comments. We're going to begin the discussion on the topic. We'll begin with school safety issues. And the first question from the audience is for Mr. Margulies. As a student representative, how do your fellow students feel about these issues? Is it fear-based? What is the motivating factor, if there is one, amongst the students?
I think the motivating factor is both fear-based, but also looking, like there is a lot of in-depth analysis about the way that gun violence has become an epidemic across our country. My peers and the people that I surround myself with they're very informed about the issues that are going on, and they are scared. They feel as if there's tragedy after tragedy, and the only thing that these schools are getting are thoughts and prayers, rather than actual legislative action that shows that their country, their state, their local community actually cares about their safety. The March 14th walkout, I think, was a very good example of this, where the students came together to, one, demand change, two, honor the victims of the Stoneman Douglas shooting. But I think the walkout reflected a lot of different viewpoints that students that didn't necessarily agree on what the final solution was, rather a collective acknowledgement about that a collective acknowledgement that there has to be some sort of solution that comes up. I think that that's the general mantra, general feeling that the students at Nevada Union are feeling, and across the country, obviously, as you can see from what happened today to what happened March 14th and to what's been happening for decades.
Ms. Goldslaw, following up on that concern of fear, I don't know if you've done your crisis planning with the local school district or not. Do you know if they have a plan in place?
Well, we're very fortunate in California because SB 187 is probably the gold standard in school safety plans. I've worked with schools again across the nation, and I always bring in California's plan and suggest they use it because it does look at areas of concern. You look at data, you bring in law enforcement, you bring in mental health, you look at the areas that need attention, pick a couple of areas to address during the year, and the entire school community, parents, teachers, students, and administrators, and law enforcement are all supposed to address it. It is using that community policing model of working together. It also mandates a number of sexual harassment, drills, so on and so forth that have to be in place and have to be addressed every year. So it's really, really good. The one thing I want to point out, though, with the fear base, my experience has been that it's difficult to talk about school safety and about training. And the training for lockdowns, if it is fear-based and high anxiety, it creates fear in students and teachers. Because that's not the way we teach. We teach in a scaffolding way where you learn a little bit and then you learn a little more and a little more after that. Schools that have gone through training that has been designed by somebody from education with input from law enforcement so that it's integrated, the kids find that and teachers find that they're very confident because they know what to do. And that fear part, there's a fear that it may happen, but not a fear about what to do.
All right. There's a question from the audience that, if I can find it. And this, I think, we might start with Mr. Gomez, and then I believe others of you will want to chime in. The question is, there are many qualified veterans who would gladly and proudly augment security at our local schools. Do you think, based upon your experience with peace officer training, Mr. Gomez, that this is a feasible proposal?
Well, I believe it's a feasible proposal as long as they're not armed, because current law, existing law, would not permit that armed on campuses. That has been taken away from the school administrators and the jurisdiction of the schools, and it's a prohibition that's in law. So to hire veterans, you can hire a veteran. I like that, actually, because I'm a Marine Corps veteran. But in terms of armed security, I don't think that that's feasible under existing law.
And I think the tone of the question was volunteer, recognizing that there wouldn't be money to hire extra.
Well, I kind of maybe jumped to that other conclusion.
Right.
Volunteer, I think that, yeah, that is fine. It's just a matter of what your safety plan is to include, what kind of training you would give them, what would be the role in terms of prevention or monitoring. It would really depend on what the goal would be to do that. Is it visible? Is it presence? Mm-hmm. Is it comfort? Is it a security blanket? And what role do they play in terms of the training and the protocol for school safety?
Okay. Anybody else want to?
Well, Michael's correct that under California law, only law enforcement or security guards can be armed on campus. So volunteers of any sort who are armed wouldn't be allowed on campus. I question, the Brady campaign's not opposed to having armed security and law enforcement on campus. and absolutely support the training and preparation and safety plans. And I was part of that in my school district on the safety committee, and the things we can do as a plant in terms of my district. We couldn't even lock the doors from the inside. We got new blinds so you couldn't see through. We got walkie-talkies for the yard duty so they can communicate, and all these plans were shared with law enforcement. And all that is so important, that kind of preparedness. But I really think when we're, if we're having to respond to an active shooter, hopefully we don't have to. But, that does happen. And we've seen a shooting happen in Nevada County where my daughter was killed. But what can we do to prevent that need in the first place in terms of, the counseling services, the mental health, the anti-bullying programs, having students engaged, working with their families, and then I would offer too that part of the solution is access to guns. And just one statistic to throw out there, I think it's 68% of school shooters, students who bring a gun to school, get that gun from the home. So what can we do in terms of promoting safe storage so children don't have access to guns? So it's multi-pronged approach, obviously.
To further with that, 52 years ago, we had our first real school shooting. That was in the University of Texas bell tower. That was in 1966. Since then, in an ever-increasing rate, we have more and more and more and more. And now students are walking out and everybody's upset. How long does it take a community to take action? How long does it take the state or the federal government? This is not about guns. Now, I agree. Kids should not have access to guns. And California has laws that if you allow access, you're in trouble. But that doesn't do any good once the children are dead. It doesn't matter if someone bought a gun legally or bought it illegally. The children are dead. In America, our society has caused this. It is clear and plain. There is no way to predict. The first school shooter was an Eagle Scout and a United States Marine Corps veteran who dearly loved his wife and mother. He had an IQ far above the normal range. He did not understand what he was doing. All the signs were there. He went to a psychiatrist and says, I'm actually having thoughts of getting on that tower and shooting people. A week later, he did. The recent shooter at Parkland gave all indications to law enforcement, mental health, and the school that he was going over the edge, and nobody did anything. But yet we have requirements that they do. We must protect these children. I would like someone to rationally explain to me, other than money, why a courthouse has armed guards and metal detectors. Police departments have armed guards and bulletproof glass. But our children have nothing. There should be a police officer in every school in America. We have a crisis in our country at the moment, and the only way to alleviate that crisis is to put an end to it. The last school shooting after Parkland lasted about 8 seconds because the shooter, who had intended to shoot numerous students, was immediately confronted by an armed school officer. Money is not an issue. Nevada County just spent over $40,000 to change the bathroom signs for politically correct reasons. For God's sakes, it only cost about 60 grand to 80 grand to put a paid police officer on a school campus. It doesn't matter how much it cost. It's got to be done for a while until this crisis stops. That is the only, we cannot enter people's minds. When we have action, we can take it, and we must. But in the meantime, we have to stop this crisis. That's it.
Follow-up question, please. Follow-up question, I guess would go to Morgan. What are the, from your perspective, what are the students or the school administration doing to increase the students' sense of safety?
Yeah, there has been, so the week preceding the Stoneman Douglas shooting, we had a safety week. that was facilitated by our administrators, where we went over every single drill, and we went over every single drill that pertained to the safety of our safety of the students on campus. The next day, or I'm not sure. Actually, I don't know the timeline. We've had a lot of acknowledgement about it when, like, on the school board and through administration. There has been the Nevada County Superintendent's Office gave a presentation to the board about to the board and the teachers about correct protocol to deal with an active shooter on campus. It's a procedure called ALICE. Not sure the acronym stands for, but it's about actively trying to stop the shooter. And I think that students do understand that the school is trying to do something to help them, but there's sometimes some things that have been a little bit disheartening, such as sitting in the hallway and when a student asked the teacher what's going to happen during the drill tomorrow, they said, "I don't know, just hide under your desk." So there are some things where I think some teachers, some administrators, and even higher up aren't taking it as seriously. Are taking it as seriously, but aren't necessarily connecting with the students and taking that sort of action to ensure that the students know that they are safe. And I know that the students, like not just me, are also feeling and pay attention to what's sort of happening from the administrative at the administrative level. And yeah.
And Ms.
I
Holtzclaw.
cringed there.
I know.
Sorry.
No, that was okay, Morgan. A couple of things. I worked with Senator Lieu before I went off to Congress, and we were trying to get legislation in place that would, if you were going to become an administrator, there would have to be a safety component. Right now, so many administrators don't know what they don't know, ditto teachers, because they've never been trained. You know, they have to bring in an outside consultant, law enforcement who doesn't necessarily know the workings of a school and what a classroom teacher is going through. But they're not trained, and they're thrown into it without any training whatsoever. So, and in terms of hiding under your desk, there's not a person from law enforcement who would hide under a desk or a table during a shooting. Get a barricade and get off center behind something that'll hide you or provide cover or concealment. Thank you.
All right. Another question in the same area is, there's legislation pending in several states to allow teachers to be armed after some training. Do you think this concept would do anything to reduce violence or the potential of violence in schools? Let me start with Mr. Rebane, if you could.
Well, let me begin to answer that question, first of all, by explaining that we're here sharing viewpoints that are held across the land. Mr. Margillis said that gun violence has become an epidemic, quote unquote. And I think another word was used, that we're having a crisis. If you look at the data from agencies like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, Pew Research, National Center for Health Statistics, the data does not support that. So are tens of millions of Americans who look at that, and that's the way they feel. I mean, that just happens to be the case. I'm not debating it. I'm just telling you that the data doesn't support it. So your question was?
What about arming teachers?
Arming teachers. Well, since I think Mr. Johnson pointed to something very important. Years ago, a school safety problem was falling off the trampoline or breaking a leg sliding into second. something has happened in the last 50 plus years, which really doesn't involve guns. It involves something much, much deeper about our culture. And I think Mr. Johnson was pointing this out, that we need to look at that. Right now, since there are massacres in schools, and guns will get into schools that are unguarded, there's no doubt about that. The teachers, as in Parkland, they have one choice right now to do, is to try to stop the bullet with their body before it hits the kid. So the answer is obviously yes. Train people, put them in schools, and if they are teachers who are willing to do this, absolutely arm the teachers. The Israelis have done this for decades with tremendous success.
And I believe the question also asked, do you think this concept would reduce or increase?
Hey, wait a minute, don't wave that 30-second thing at me.
Excuse me.
The judge is asking me more questions.
I got it under control. Whether or not you think that concept of students being in schools where some or many of their teachers have firearms would make it more fearful or less fearful for the students and/or the parents?
I think it would make it less fearful. Most certainly the Israeli children have no such problems. As a part of my deep, dark past background is as a World War II veteran, on the wrong side, by the way, and as a child. Fear goes into children from the adults. Mm-hmm. I have sat in bomb shelters being strafed and so forth. I took my cues from my parents, and I saw other children also. They take cues from their parents. If their parents were screaming, the kids were screaming. My parents were stoic and hung on. I was stoic. So I think children have not changed that much over the years.
Thank you.
As I stated earlier, my organization, the Brady Campaign, and me personally, I don't have any problem with armed security guards or law enforcement on campuses where the district wants that, where it seems appropriate. In terms of arming teachers, I am opposed to that. And I think, like many of these matters, we got to look at benefit or perceived benefit versus risk. And the risk involved with having someone in a classroom whose main job is to teach and to make the kinds of decisions that are difficult for even law enforcement to make in terms of, do you shoot or not shoot, and are you prepared to shoot a student, and are you shooting the right student? And law enforcement comes, and are you the good guy with the gun or the bad guy with the gun? And I think the chances of other people being caught in the crossfire, or the teacher not making a good decision, or something to that gun, happening to that gun, those risks outweigh a benefit, a perceived benefit. And I will add to that, both at Columbine and Parkland, there were armed security guards. The shooting that you just mentioned, the student actually killed himself. He wasn't killed by the security person there, though he was there getting him, so maybe that's why he killed himself, right? And there's times where it will be effective, but I think you have to look at the totality of, do the risks, does the benefit outweigh the risk? And I don't believe it does.
Yeah, I would agree with everything she just said, and I would like to include things that have happened in the last month. Stoneman Douglas gave their teachers guns, and the teacher left a loaded, cocked gun in the bathroom, and it was fired by someone that walked in the bathroom to see if it was loaded. A teacher in San Francisco that had a gun accidentally shot the roof, and the panels fell on a student and injured him. I think that, if you look at the experiment of giving teachers guns that's happened, there's not been a teacher stopping a major shooting. Rather, teachers that are not trained having these guns just make for a more dangerous campus. Second thing, I'd like to respond to what Dr. Urbane said. I would contest that the reason why gun violence has decreased in the past couple of years is a national movement for stricter gun laws. And also, if you look at it, 33,636 deaths in 2013 came from guns. 33,000, just the same amount came from like traffic and car accidents. Gun violence is an epidemic that's spanning our country. Firearms make up 67% of all murders across the United States. I don't know how you could not call like this gun violence not an epidemic or a crisis.
Yes, Ms. Holzclaw, please. Okay, please.
If teachers had the inclination to carry guns, to be willing to shoot another human being, we probably would have gone into the military or law enforcement. We would have been protectors. We're not. The great majority of us are, we're teachers. We're trained to teach. We're trained to manage 20 to 40 kids, for 7 hours and teach them subject matter. We're not, we teach them etiquette. We teach them social interactions. We teach them all kinds of things in terms of, and the subject matter they're supposed to be learning. No, we're not. We are not also, we should not be carrying guns. Even those that have the inclination, they're still responsible for 30 to 40 kids. And if they die, which if they have a handgun and go up against somebody, with an assault rifle, they're going to. No, it doesn't make this, if a kid is out on the campus with a stick beating up other kids, you don't give all the kids another stick. You take the stick away.
Well,
Mr. Johnson.
it's all very interesting. Yeah, it was too bad after the Parkland shooter that a teacher left a gun in the bathroom. But boy, wouldn't it have been nice if a teacher had had a gun the day that guy came in and murdered all those students. I'd rather have an embarrassment off of a bathroom issue than a bunch of dead students laying in a hallway. Schools are part of the problem. Sierra College does not have armed security on its campus. Schools for years and years and years were opposed to even police officers being on their campus. Yes, teachers are somewhat liberal-minded normally, and most of them shouldn't be carrying guns. I've been a firearms instructor for almost 40 years, but I can tell you that most individuals who wish to be may be very well trained and very efficient with a firearm. Most police officers are not very good shots. In the last several decades, most police departments have lost their firing range and their ability to even practice. Most civilians shoot better than police officers do. I'm looking around this room and I know several males and females in here that I would not want to get in a shootout with. Whatever it takes. Now, schools are used as victims for one reason and one reason only. They are what is called soft targets. The shooter has no fear. They go in there and they know that they are going to get no armed resistance. That's why over half of the school shootings are in grammar elementary schools, where the kids have no chance. We must put a stop to this. And if we need to arm a few teachers in a school, so that even if it just gives the image to a shooter that this is not a soft target. Do you see them walking into police departments? Do you see them walking into biker bars to do mass shootings? No, they pick our schools and they're going to do it over and over. I have 5 children. I worry about them, whether they're in a university or a high school. Nobody is doing anything. Now, some states allow teachers to carry guns. One of those states is Utah. How many school shootings you heard about in Utah? You don't know if those teachers are armed or not in your class. We must stop all this talking and do something. We can talk this to death. You're not going to stop those students from being shot until this soft target issue ends. And even if it's only for a while, we've got to get the mindset out of these people that you cannot walk into a school in the United States and shoot people. What happened after 9/11? The first thing we did was arm pilots. Most pilots have no ability to use a firearm. They had to go through training,
Most are.
and even that training wasn't efficient. But I'll tell you what, you never know if a pilot's armed or not. You don't know if there's a marshal on the plane. People need to wonder when they go into a school, am I going to get away with this? Not, hey, how many am I going to get? Am I going to set the record?
Can I just punctuate
You may.
that? Whenever a criminal or an insane person sees gun-free zone sign, that means an invitation, because there are no law-abiding, he's guaranteed there are no law-abiding guns in that facility. Gun-free zone is it. And as Mr. Johnson says, we have to put guns to stop guns.
All right,
I'll wait.
okay. While we're still on the subject, general subject of school safety, back to Morgan. Do students, in your view, have a responsibility with safety on campus?
Most definitely. As I mentioned before, the ALICE training, I still don't know the acronym, but we've heard about it and we've talked about it. And the ALICE training, ALICE as a protocol for dealing with school shootings is a shift away from barricade yourself, hide in the corner, and all get in one place to make sure that and like hide away. Rather, ALICE is a protocol where students take the matter into their own responsibility and get books, get things to where if a shooter comes into their room, they can disarm him, throw books at him, because a shooter is a lot less effective when a textbook is flying at his face. So I think that in that respect, students feel that it is their responsibility to ensure safety on campus. And I also feel in another respect, when it comes to sort of reaching out to people, there was, on Nevada County Peeps, there was a lot of walk up, not out sort of deal, whereas we need to take care and reach out to people that seem like they're suffering and have been alienated. And while I agree with that, and I don't think the two are mutually exclusive of demanding gun control and walking up, I think that's a very good, it's a good sort of first step of acknowledging that social alienation is a formula that allows for this kind of stuff, which means that students do have a responsibility to make sure that their peers are cared for and that everyone is getting the sort of attention and empathy that is needed.
Ms. Holtzclaw, are there programs in your guidelines and programs that you help create that address what Morgan just raised with the students' responsibilities?
The students, we train students from actually preschool through, we've trained them through college, but our training typically is K-12. And it's a variation on the run, hide, fight that takes into account the different age groups and limitations that kids may have in the classroom, such as being hard of hearing or special ed, severe special ed, handicapped. We have had simulations that have had a couple of thousand kids out on campus during break, and we've called a lockdown. We've had 100 law enforcement in an interior theater ready to come out and observe chiefs and sheriffs from around the area. And they timed it, and in under 40 seconds, you could not see a child or an adult on that campus. 40 seconds. The other is they saw a group of kids, freshmen probably, running into a classroom that had been unlocked. They knew it was unlocked. The group of 4 or 5 chiefs and sheriffs went over to push the door to try to get in. They could not get through the door. So barricading, serious barricading, not wimpy barricading, is your first line of defense. And if you're barricaded inside, then you can wait for law enforcement. I received an award from commendation from one police department that I'd worked with, and they said, essentially, you've taken 300 to a few thousand kids off from our radar. We don't have to think about kids and teachers and wonder who to shoot, if they're the bad guy, because they're all gone. They're all hidden. It's given us a clear pathway. And what ends up happening is they end up having an armed intruder event that you don't hear about rather than an active shooter. But all kids learn this. They participate. And the kindergartners and first graders are great. They're used to building forts.
Michael, in terms of student responsibility, citizens or students and teachers, how does that fit in with community policing concepts?
Well, I was actually jotting down some similarities, and I don't think there was opposition, but there's similarities in our conversation this evening regarding a solution. And we've heard several solutions or several proposals regarding, arming teachers or arming security guards to law enforcement officers, et cetera. So, going back to, Jared, something you said is that, one of the solutions is more law enforcement, school resource officers, if you will. And then you begin that discussion with the schools. How are our schools built to protect our students? They're built on architecture and designs from, I don't know what century. But if you look at that, and as we talk about solutions, because we are having this dialogue, is that students themselves have never been involved in the design of schools. Never. Student councils. Because when they know their backyard, they know where to go. And in law enforcement, we tend to, in our old school, we always had the answers for everything, but obviously we don't. But when it comes down to this conversation, starting the conversation that we're having tonight, it's really about what's on the agenda for problem solving, not so much opinions, but what can we agree to regarding what the students need, what our beliefs are to protect our children, and then what the environment is on the campus for teachers and for the students themselves to feel safe in an academic environment. So that's the continuing dialogue that has to occur now. I think we have something on the table. We just need to get more definition to it and have more discussion on this, because community policing is about these ideas that come up and really, through a process, is it feasible or not? Is it? Is it feasible, to have more resource? What are the barriers? Is it funding? Is it manpower? Is it the schools don't want cops? There's these kinds of things that go through each of us, that we have our own solutions, but you look at the client, the school, and the teachers. Is this the environment they want? And how much of that are they willing to give in those proposals as we begin to think about solutions, how to better protect our children without getting into the big debate about guns, but how do we resolve it?
Go ahead. Okay.
I want to share one quick story on community policing. Day after 9/11, little 8-year-old came onto a K5 campus, and instead of saying I'm late and I didn't do my homework, she said, "There's a guy with a gun out by the restrooms." School went into lockdown. Now, they had the training. They had not done a drill. But the SWAT team was down the street, and they said, "We'll take the call." So within 10, 15 minutes, they figured out it was a false alarm, talked with the principal, and decided to go ahead with the drill. That night, I got a phone call. Everything went perfectly. The kids were great. They did exactly what they were told. The teachers were great. The barricades were great. Everything was great until they got to the kindergarten. The comment was it was like herding wet cats. How do you manage a room full of kindergartners? They wouldn't listen. They wanted to see our guns. They wanted to hold our hands. They had 10,000 questions. And I said, I don't know. I teach high school, but I'll go talk to the kindergarten teachers. Went back and they said stickers. If you have a sticker, a kid will do anything. All of the SWAT teams and tactical, SWAT teams that I've worked with, they all carry stickers in their tactical gear so they can get preschool and kindergartners evacuated safely. That's community policing.
Yes. Quick comment, and we're due to.
Yeah, since we opened up the numbers game over here, and since reasonable discussion of social problems always should be based on numbers and not anecdotal evidence, maybe here's some numbers that we should sort of frame this discussion with. Teens aged 12 to 19 die at the rate of 17,000 a year. Suicides are 43,000 all over the country. Consider medical mistakes. Medical mistakes kill over 200,000. Gun deaths have been going down markedly. In 2006, it was 4.28 per 100,000, down to 3.45 in 2014, a 20% drop in homicides alone. Teen violence. Teen violence, white kids die at the rate of 2.6 per 100,000. Hispanics, 17.1 per 100,000. Non-Hispanics, which is predominantly blacks, 39.2 per 100,000. Half of the kids, teenagers, die of unintentional injury. Of the total 17,000, 2,200 die of homicides. 1,900 teenagers commit suicide every year. Of the unintentional injuries, I think Mr. Margolis pointed this out before, but the number is about 6,000 out of that 8,000 die in motor vehicle accidents. And unintentional discharge of firearms for teenagers kill about 340 per year. So some perspective on numbers.
Can I make
One quick comment, and then we're going to break.
Yeah, so you mentioned that suicides are a large cause of teenage death, and I did a lot of research on this, and that there's a lot of correlational evidence, or there's a massive correlation between the amount of guns in a certain region and successful suicides. After reading my AP psychology book, I read that a lot of suicides are a result of a very snap decision. That when someone has a gun, they have a 96% chance of killing themselves. When someone is taking pills or cutting their wrist or something, that the rate in which they have a successful suicide is so much lower. I looked up this statistic the other day where in states that, in a state of 50 million people, or like a conglomeration of states with 50 million people that have the strictest gun laws, there are 13,000 there are 13,000 successful suicides a year, while 9,000 of those are not gun related. The rest, 4,000, are gun related. In the states with the least strict gun laws, there are 26,000 with the same population, 26,000 suicides a year, with the same amount of non-gun deaths, but about triple or quadruple the amount of suicide via a firearm. So like when we talk about these other causes of death, a lot of these have to do with the availability of guns in a certain region. And there's also a lot of correlational research about the amount of deaths from a gun and the amount of guns per 100 people. If you look at it, I have a graph, but yeah.
Panel, we're going to take a short break. It was pre-scheduled, and please try to be back in approximately 5 minutes. You're doing well. Thank you very much.
concession? Army teacher, which is off the table in California. But she said, you know, the number of emails teachers who've lost the keys, lost their cell phones. You really want that?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a lot. It doesn't make sense.
You're going to jail.
And I knew about the Parkland teacher and left it on the,
Thanks, Jared. I appreciate that. What a compliment.
Oh, yeah.
All right. All right, we're back, and appreciate everybody's timeliness. Let's go on with some other questions. We're going to shift a little bit. Our focus was pretty much on school issues. I'm going to go more into community safety issues and try to focus on some of the questions that will be asked, but also possible solutions that our community can address in the course of as you're thinking about some of these issues. Let's start with, well, this will be an interesting one. Communities with gun stores and shooting ranges. How do these businesses balance their existence in communities with wide and ardent divisions on gun issues? And should they be concerned about public opinion? We'll start with, obviously, Mr. Johnson.
Well, having a gun store, that is an interesting question. I was in law enforcement, a police administrator, when I opened the range. And people ask me all the time about gun laws, and they assume because I own a gun store that I am absolutely opposed to any type of gun control. That is not the case. I believe that every person, whether they're buying a new or used firearm, should have to go through a background check in every state of the Union, without exception. But I believe that that background check has to be reasonable. And when it's not reasonable, like you have in California, what people do is they buy the guns under the table. And so you get a lot of debate. In California, if you want to buy a gun, you wait 10 days if you pass the background check. And then you have to wait 30 days before you can buy another one. If you go across the border to Nevada and you want to buy a gun, you hand them your driver's license, they scan it in a machine, and in about 10 seconds, they determine whether you're eligible to purchase a firearm or not. Our system is so antiquated, it causes debate. I do care what people think on both sides, but I am very much supportive of people owning firearms. People have such misconceptions. A place like the range is where people go to really understand it. For instance, we have a judge in here. We have several police officers, retired and active. I would challenge any one of them to stand up and tell me they know the gun laws in the state of California. In the California Penal Code, all right, there we go. All right, give me section 16738.
Let me find it first.
Just to give you an idea, we've had conversations or statements about we have to increase the laws. In California, let me find it here, starting with section 16,000 of the California Penal Code, it starts the gun laws at 16,000. At 33,000 some odd, it ends. Half those laws contradict the previous laws. Nobody can understand them. We have so many laws regulating firearms that the rest of the nation just laughs at us. Look at our school shootings. Look how many we've had. Laws alone will not stop this problem. So education is very important. For instance, this is a county that's now turned marijuana friendly. It's now going to bring millions of dollars of revenue. Did you know that if you have a marijuana prescription or you use marijuana, you are prohibited from owning a firearm? But is anything being done to stop those people from getting a firearm? No. So to answer your question, having a place like the range where people could go and be educated, it certainly helps the people that are not criminals. Criminals, they don't care about the law. Do you think they're worried about committing a misdemeanor if they're going to slaughter 30 innocent school children? No, they don't care about that.
Amanda.
Well, a lot to respond to there. One point I want to make in following up on what Morgan said was about suicide, and most people don't realize that 62% of firearm deaths are suicide by firearm. And I think gun ranges and gun dealers have a very important role to play in terms of educating looking for signs of risk of suicide and educating families about removing access to a gun when someone is suicidal. And I know I'm not the messenger for that, but I think gun owners and law enforcement and target range owners like yourself can really play a role in reducing suicide by firearm. Regarding California's gun laws, we do have the strongest gun laws in the nation. We have universal background check. We have a 10-day waiting period, which you referred to, which is actually very important for suicide prevention and that cooling off time. We have child access prevention laws. We have records on who has guns so we can disarm them if they fall into a category of a prohibited person. We ban particularly dangerous weapons, and I can go on and on. But the point I want to make, the key point, is that California's reduction in our firearm mortality rate in California has dropped 56%, 3 times the reduction in the rest of the nation, since the high for both California and the nation in 1993. They have dropped in the nation. Firearm mortality rate has dropped 3 times more in California. So I would suggest that our gun laws are making a difference. But on top of that, our gun sales are record high. So we are not stopping law-abiding, sane, if you will, I don't really like to use that term, people from buying guns. We're not stopping it. I'll admit, it's a little more inconvenient. You have to wait 10 days. But we are not stopping it, but we're doing a better job of keeping guns out of dangerous hands, and the data shows it. And the rest of the nation should follow California's lead on this. Lives will be saved.
Mr. Margulies.
One of the main issues that you brought up was this idea of interstate discrepancies, where in California you wait 10 days, 30 days to get a gun, and then you go to Nevada and get it in a couple minutes. And that's a reason why laws don't work, but that just points to why federal legislation is important. The reason Illinois has one of the strictest gun laws in America. There's a lot of violence in Chicago. You know why? Indiana is a 10 to 40 minute drive away, and they have the least restrictive gun laws, and most violence committed in Chicago are with guns purchased across the border. That's a reason why a federal registry, a federal universal background checks, and federal gun control is important. And I guess when you say laws are not necessary to sort of stop the violence, if you take a look at Australia in 1996, 93, I forget, they initiated this gun buyback program where they sort of just bought everyone's guns, and then everyone had to come back and go through a universal background check to get their guns back. Not suggesting that happens, but it's an example of how and then their gun violence dropped at least 20% after that program. And it just goes to show that legislation that is legislation that's national can decrease violence in the country.
Yes, Mr. Rubin.
Just to put that into perspective, is this better?
Yes, there you go.
There were complaints during the intermission here. Just to put that into perspective on 2 things, on both on gun suicides and the Australia experience. The violence, the homicides and so forth, yes, gun violence, gun homicides went down. The homicide rate did not. They started using other weapons. One of the little pieces of data that if you haven't gotten this, might be interesting to know, that Great Britain has one of the toughest sets of gun laws.
Gold standard.
The gold standard in the EU and the gold standard some claim in the world. Guess what? The homicide rate in London with knives as the weapon of choice now is higher than in New York City with guns. And the response, of course, is now Parliament is considering and has already introduced bills to start outlawing all kinds of knives, including all kinds of kitchen knives and so forth. So you can see where this is going very, very quickly. On suicides, of course, anybody contemplating suicide will go for the fastest and quickest weapon of choice. There's no doubt about that. But if you look at the data on suicides without guns, the suicide rate continues the same. Psychologists tell us when they examine people who are suicidal, if they can't find a gun, they'll take another look at it. They take a pill, a car accident, whatever it is. In other words, they'll do something else. It's the attitude of the suicide. And you're absolutely right. They can execute faster, but they'll take a longer time to complete the suicide. At least that's what the psychologists tell us.
Ms. Wilcox.
In terms of suicide, I would want someone to try a pill or cutting versus a gun because there is a chance to intervene. A gun is quick.
That's a good
It's impulsive,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
And so suicide attempts, these other methods are used. Completed suicides, it's firearm. And the data does show that those who have attempted a suicide and survived because they didn't use a gun do not go on to die by suicide later. So the extent that access to firearms is limited by those who are suicidal, suicides are prevented. And again, that is our biggest gun violence prevention, gun violence problem, particularly in this county where we have a lot of suicides by firearm.
Mrs. Holtzclaw first, please.
Now, I'm not a therapist, not a psychologist, but I did run a center with one of the top supervisors from therapy. And his take, and he was an instructor as well, he said there's a continuum. We're kind of most of the time in the middle. We might get a little angry and a little sad, but we've got the tools to kind of come back and recenter. However, if you don't have the tools, and a lot of times young people don't have the tools, you get more raging, you get more depressed. And if you keep going, you will either be homicidal or suicidal. But it bounces back and forth. And so the person that commits suicide is just as at risk of picking up a gun and committing homicide. And that's something to factor
Or the
in.
murder-suicides, common.
Yes, George, go ahead.
We,
Dr. Remain.
we probably need to bring this point out. The gun debate, as so many other debates in governance and organizing society, hinges on how the different sides look at the world. And psychologists and philosophers call this ontology. What kind of an ontology does a person have? In other words, this is the worldview. This is the way the universe looks to them when they open their eyes. One of the first things I think we need to do before we start solving all these problems, otherwise we're going to keep talking past each other, is to see if we can look at the world the same way, because right now we look at the same data and we see different things, we conclude different things. We don't even agree on the facts. I mean, look at the literature that is being published by, the right and the left and so forth and so on. So that is an initiative itself, is how do we come together and look at the world and see the same thing so we can be solving the same problem instead of talking past each other.
Thank you. Excuse me. Please hold your applause until the very end. Mrs. Wilcox.
Yeah, I really agree with you about different views of the world. I had a great phone conversation a couple weeks ago with the woman who leads or organizes the Friend of the NRA dinner. We talked for over an hour. It was really good. And by the end, I was thinking, what? Everything she said is kind of logical and makes sense if you agree with her basic premise. And therein, I think, lies the difference on this and many issues in terms of feelings of fear and vulnerability and paranoia about the government. And, you know, if you have that basic view, a lot of the gun positions sort of are logical consequences of it. And what I found was this, I just had a different, very, very different view about my safety and the need for self-defense, that everyone's out to get me, or, you know, mass shootings are still very rare events. And most people who are killed by a gun are killed by someone who knows them. And I just don't have that many enemies, I guess. I don't feel that vulnerable. So I think you're right that the starting point often is so different in terms of our view of the world and our view of our personal safety, I guess.
And that raises another question that came in, which is this perception of fear. And there was an article about it within the last year in the local paper about the perception of our citizens in Grass Valley, Nevada City, feeling that crime is on the rise, it's getting out of control, and people are more afraid now than they've ever been before, when statistically that's not true in terms of the number of actual crimes that have been committed or reported. So how does the local law enforcement agencies deal with that? And I know community policing is part of that concept, is to be able to deal with those issues. So what?
Correct, and part of the discussion that has to occur when people are feeling that way is going back to looking at the evidence and the data itself, and informing the public what the data means in that respective perspective of maybe how they may feel versus what the data shows. And then you have to look at locale. You have to look at what we call place-based community policing, because a lot of times you will have in a community that has really never had any crime, all of a sudden there is a influx of I'll use the gang concept, where the gangs have infiltrated a particular community and the crime is going up. They've never heard gunshots at night, and so they're fearful. So you have to really, as a law enforcement agency in community-based discussions, is begin to inform people, you know, what it is we see, what the evidence shows, and how we're tackling it, and really have that discussion of why the fear is there and how do you alleviate that fear through the discussions with your community on how we protect one another and what the police department is doing or not doing, and then solutions from the community as to what are the next steps, what are our continuing discussions about the next steps in progressive law enforcement in community policing, and what I would say informing the public of what really is happening.
Mr. Johnson, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I have a thought on it. I'd like to ask the audience, how many people in this room have either been burglarized lately or know somebody that has been burglarized? Just raise your hands. Now turn around and look and tell me the crime rate is down in Nevada County. It is not down. Statistics, we can put them in any direction we want, but more and more people I talk to are either getting home security, they come up to the range and they want to buy a firearm because they were approached by some bizarro on the street. There weren't any officers around. It is a situation where people are not paranoid, people are concerned. And because a person buys a firearm because they're concerned does not make them paranoid. It does not make them believe that the government is after them. What makes them believe the government's after them or paranoid are politicians who react to one specific incident and all of a sudden try to pass legislation. A lot of people own firearms just because they enjoy the firearms. They like the historical aspect of them. They like the security of them. They like to go shooting. Recently, I hear everybody say that we don't want to take guns away from law-abiding people. We just want to pass more laws. We've got 3,000 of them. Right now, in the California legislation, there is another bill to tax ammunition and firearms so that the law-abiding gun owner has to pay for counselors for schools and school resource officers. Why is it always the law-abiding gun owner that has to bear the burden for what some criminal does or somebody that wants to end their life does? Why are we putting the burden on the biting people. It makes no sense. Criminals do not obey the law. To tax and tax and tax, and to limit and limit and limit. Now, I agree, as I've said earlier, with reasonable gun laws. I think the fact that crime rate is down, per se, with firearms in California nationwide only shows that we don't need more laws. If the rate is going down, why do we need more laws? Now, if an incident comes up like the bump stock thing in Vegas, makes perfect sense to look at those type of ridiculous things. Do we need to change the age of a kid nowadays to get a rifle? Probably. Those are reasonable. But to pass or try to pass, this is what caused people to go out and buy firearms when they don't really need to. We have to be reasonable about this. If someone's going to commit suicide, I'm not overly concerned about it. I'm sorry. I'm concerned about our children. I'm concerned about women safely walking down the street. We only report the crimes that we want to report in law enforcement anymore.
Mrs. Wilcox.
Yes, I would first want to point out that suicide is very much a tragedy. Often it's very momentary, the feeling. Often it's a young person, and regardless of the age of the person, it's someone's son or daughter or parent, and it is a tragedy, and it's very much a gun violence problem. I hear over and over about criminals don't follow the laws. Yes, we know that. Criminals don't follow all the laws. Murder is against the law in our country. People still commit murder. We don't say, well, see, people don't follow that law, let's not have a law against murder. When someone runs through a stop sign and causes an accident, we don't say, see, stop signs don't work, let's not have any stop signs. I mean, again, it's rates. It's the public health approach. And California is showing that these gun laws that are still allowing people to buy lots and lots of guns are bringing down the rate of gun deaths. Other states with strong gun laws have fewer gun deaths. And then the evidence is clear. That's how it is. Where there are strong gun laws or where there are fewer guns, there are fewer gun deaths.
Such as Chicago and Detroit.
Such as Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Hawaii, Connecticut. They all have strong gun laws and they have low gun death rates.
Let me keep going with questions before we run out of time. Next question, I believe, is for Mr. Gomez. Could someone please define community policing?
Well, community policing is really a larger program and principle of community engagement where you're actually problem solving, but it's really engaging opportunities for relationships with the community. So you're working with the youth, you're working with the media, you're working with faith-based organizations, civic organizations, community leaders, and government officials to bring everybody together, similar to what you're doing tonight. The difference, however, in community-based policing is that you have a solution agenda, an agenda that, and a solution, or if you will, a decision-making point that this is a priority issue for our community. And the issue of our community is the crime rate says this, but our people don't feel that way. Why? Well, we've got to look at the evidence. Is the data off? Are people reporting the crimes or not? Or is the police department not collecting the data properly? Why? And so you have to come to some resolution as with community policing when you're bringing your entire community together where everybody's concerns are expressed and you're starting to I would say filter what really is there and what's not there. Community policing is really about solution-oriented problem solving for the community where everybody has a vested interest in the outcome of public safety initiatives in their community, whether it's, I think, Jared, you mentioned the whole issue with or we don't have more deputies or more police officers in schools. I mean, that is an item, a solution item that has to be resolved by in community policing, whether it's the police department or whether it's the city council or another group that, or let's say taxpayers, saying, we want to pass a tax to to make our schools safe. So community policing isn't just a component. It's a conversation of problem solving with everybody's buying in, and to some degree you may not even have an agreement because philosophically we don't agree on certain things. Here would be a classic example. I worked in the legislature for 8 years, and whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we have different ideologies in terms of politics and governance in California. But the one thing that I did find out is when you start to know the people and know their interest and know their heart and why they believe in what they believe in, you build a relationship with that individual that you can actually talk and say, how do we solve this? How do we solve the issue at hand when it comes to the burglary, the crime rate? With the community saying that let's do something about it, and you have buy-in from all the groups, the youth and everybody involved, that they may still have differences of opinion regarding of why it happens, but we know how and why we should attack the problem, whether it's through taxes or legislation or whatever. But the community is a neighborhood that sticks together to solve problems and to, if you will, hold hands even though we don't agree with each other.
It's exactly right.
Right.
I shouldn't say this because I'll lose money, but I love it when the judges in this county continue to plea bargain cases off and the public sees the same names over and over to where the general public recognizes the guy's name because they just read it a week ago for another crime. People come up to the range and they buy guns. So the judges and the courts and the prosecutors have to get in with the community as well. And so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And one quick question that any of you can answer, because whose responsibility is it to institute these actions to make sure that the statistics and the feelings of the community are brought together? Who is to initiate that problem-solving effort?
Well, in community, because I come from the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training,
Right.
so our client is the police department and the sheriff's department. So we have them be the leaders in that problem solving. We train them how to facilitate. We train them how to look at their data. We train them how to, if you could, look at yourself in the mirror. Are you doing the job?
And,
before you go to the community.
Let me ask Ms. Holtzclaw, and when you're creating guidelines for crisis for communities or campuses, how do you initiate the collaboration necessary between all the folks?
Well, I'm either brought in by law enforcement or by the schools, and I won't train without law enforcement, local law enforcement, usually the chief or sheriff co-presenting with me, because it's a joint effort. I remember back when this started, way back when, right after Columbine, working with a lieutenant who used to say, collaboration used to mean we got to do it my way, police department. Well, collaboration is also an unnatural act between two non-consenting adults. So it's a hard. That's good. It's difficult, but when you sit down and you're looking at a solution, and you're looking at how to solve a problem. We're talking here about guns and mental health and schools and all this, but if we had an objective up there, we want to lower the number of deaths of students in our county. Now we start talking about what the solution is, and that's it. It's actually pretty simple, but very difficult.
I have many more questions to the audience that we're not going to get to. I'm going to read one more, but I'm not going to ask for answers because it's time now, unfortunately, for us to begin our wrapping up. And in terms of wrapping up, I'm going to go back through each panel member, and you have 3 minutes to make any final statement or observations that you wish from tonight's discussions. The final question, which I'm not asking you to address directly if you don't want to, was we've heard a lot of talking tonight. How will NU be safer tomorrow, next week, next month? And I would expand that to Nevada County. With that, we're going to start our wrapping up, and I'll give you each approximately 3 minutes to make your final statements, and we'll go in the reverse order of how we started this meeting. So, Mr. Gomez?
Yeah, when I first started talking to you about community police tonight, it really was the idea of simply starting the conversation. But the conversation needs to continue. It can't stop. So in doing so, we discussed some of the differences that we all had regarding, whether it's gun violence or statistics or the crime trends, et cetera, and how people feel in youth safety in school. The one thing that community policing has, like tonight, is that we're all looking at each other, we're all listening to each other. We may agree or disagree, but the common issue tonight has been we have an issue, and it's a big issue. Whether it's statistics or whether it's how we feel, but we have to look. And Matt, Morgan, I have to tell you, I'm so glad you're here tonight because I think that for me, and Jared the same way. We did a long career in law enforcement and protecting our communities. It's now your turn. It's your turn to look at the collaboration, the efforts your generation is making for not just community policing, but community participation, getting involved in politics and decision making, similar to what you're doing with your community here tonight. Because you may be a city council member at some point, and you're going to find out that community policing isn't just for the police. It is really a process of relationships between people to solve problems and to generate ideas and to really filter the best that your society needs for your well safety and for our country.
Thank you. Carla Holtzclaw.
Well, I like to just tap into that schools have to come out of their offices and classrooms and also work with the community, with the police, law enforcement, and so on. I think everybody in today's world tends to be on overwhelm. There's a lot on our plates. There's a lot that keeps getting piled on plates. And we really need to take a deep breath, stand back, and look at what are the objectives? What do we want our county to look like? And what are we going to do to help that happen? And I really thank the organizers and thank you. It's been an honor being here tonight. Thank you.
Morgan Margulies.
Yeah, tonight was very good, I think, to bring out different perspectives about why we suffer atrocity, why these atrocities occur, and what we are going to do about it. Something that I've noticed throughout the conversation is that there was a lot of discussion about sort of reactivity, about how we're going to deal with the issue when it becomes an issue, that we're going to barricade ourselves. But I think a question we need to be asking is, how can we be proactive? How can we as a community come together, as Gomez is talking about, to sort of be community, to have community policing and prevent things like that, things that we've been talking about from happening. I think cooperation and compromises are necessary. Demands will be made, but compromises are what are going to lead us into change. So thank you tonight. Thank you for organizing this to Farm. Thank you for moderating. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Jared Johnson.
Well, this is great because we all care. And the simple fact is that we're all going to go to bed tonight gambling. We're all going to gamble that a shooter's not going to walk on to Nevada Union's campus tomorrow and kill a bunch of students. We need to stop talking and deal with the issue. Law enforcement can handle this situation, and I'm not talking about school resource officers. I'm talking about police officers, whether they're reserve or full-time. We don't need an overweight resource officer that can't run across a classroom and not even a campus. We need a police officer who is well-trained. Our children should be more important than the rest of the community. These children deserve right. They should be out walking around saying, protect us. All the things of teaching children to run and not hide and do all those things, those are designed to limit casualties, not save them. We must react to this. And when we do, you will see results. And a lot of people are going to say, oh, we don't have the money. Put me or someone like me in charge of the state of California of protecting schools, and we will cut these billions of dollars of wasted money to do all the ridiculous stuff that we do and pay reserve police officers, can design courses to train officers for nothing else but to protect our children. We need to do it, and I hope that we do, and we quit talking about it, because tomorrow's another day. Thank you.
Amanda Wilcox.
Thank you. I think the public health model is that the best way to treat an illness, if you will, is prevention. And I would just like to use the analogy of what has happened with automobiles in the last century. The first part of the last century, the auto industry said, cars don't kill people, bad drivers kill people. And then around the 1960s, there's actually researchers and physicians who started to change that debate. And they realized if they regulate the product, cars, with certain safety features, such as shatterproof windshields and collapsible steering columns and seat belts, and all those kinds of things, that lives would be saved. If they regulate drivers, drivers have to be trained, they get a license. If they show risky behavior like a DUI, they might lose their license. So those kinds of measures were put in the law. And then finally, the environment's safer in terms of better lighting, better signage, better shoulders, better roads. And that is really considered the public health success story of the last century in terms of the reduction in passenger death per vehicle mile. Note, it's not one thing, it is many, many things. Product, the person, and the environment, and I think all those approaches in some way apply to the violence in our society and certainly to keeping our schools safer. And we need to make our schools safer in how they're designed, with training, and also, of course, the prevention strategies in reaching at the mental health treatment and care and counseling services, but access to guns by people clearly who shouldn't have them. Thank you, and thank you for moderating in this opportunity.
Mr. Rebane.
Thank you, Judge, and thank Farm. Thank you, fellow panelists. I think this has been very productive, but I also think that we've been all over heaven's half acre here. As the engineer in me says, if we want to solve a problem, and here we're trying to solve a social problem, we need to define some sort of a social utility. We seem to be focused on doing something proactively, perhaps, to stop school massacres in Nevada County. And then somebody else seems that they want to minimize deaths. Somebody else wants to minimize gun deaths. What are we trying to do? Because all of these solutions are not the same solution. In other words, let's take it that we want to minimize the number of deaths, teenage deaths, 12 to 19-year-olds in Nevada County. Is starting to build Fortress Nevada County out of our schools the best way to occupy ourselves? I can tell you right here, hell no. There's so many other ways to save so many more teenage lives in Nevada County than starting to, fortify schools. But if the social utility is to minimize the probability that one of our schools will have a successful massacre in there, heaven yes, let's put some, towers up there and have police officers and gun ports and locks and armor and all that good stuff in there, and we'll minimize that probability. Until we define what problem we're trying to solve, we're going to be all over the place. And I hope that perhaps Farm or some other similar organization will have another panel and have it focused on, let's minimize teenage deaths, 12 to 19-year-old in Nevada County over the next 5 years. What can we do? What can we here in Nevada County do? Then we might be able to make some progress. Again, thank you very much.
All right, as the moderator, I get the final word. So let me just, sort of sense a wrap up, I want to thank each of the panelists. And just, I think one of the key takeaways from this is that this was a start. This is a start of a dialogue of different points of view. And I think one thing that we learned from all social problems that we've dealt with locally is that while there are many different views, there are many different things that need to be done. It's not just one task to fix a problem. And there is no one solution. All the reasonable solutions need to be implemented to solve a problem as big as this. And I think one of the key points from tonight is, as Jared Johnson said, it is clear that as a community and as panelists, we all care. And that is the starting point, that these concepts that are raised and the questions that are brought up by the audience, it requires all of us, all members of the community, all the members of the audience, to speak up and speak with each other, regardless of what team you think you're on, to move in the direction of solving problems. As I sort of referenced earlier, we as citizens and members of the community have to become involved, have to be active, have to speak up, and do what Nevada County residents traditionally do, which is step up when needed. With that, let me remind the listeners that this event will be available for viewing on the Farm's YouTube channel, as well as rebroadcast on both NCTV and KVMR. So I want to thank each of the panel members for your insight, and to the audience, to the Boy Scouts, to KVMR, NCTV, and the Foothill Arts Resources and Media. Thank you all for your participation, and good night.
Channel, which is Foothill Arts, Resources and Media, FARM. And they'll have the whole thing, and I believe NCTV as well will be broadcasting it.
Or call the number that you use to make your reservation, and we'll tell you exactly how to find it.